Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for Thursday, December 8th, 2016. There's literally a metric crap ton of VR news to talk about, so let's jump right into VR, guys. Quick preamble explanation on a video, and I don't never do this lightly, that I removed yesterday. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may have seen it but not watched it and saved it for later or not cared. This was the Arizona Sunshine video. Now, I'm okay with having a video that's rough with some warts, if it's real, like in the case of news, or, my shipping fiasco issue back earlier this year. What I'm not okay with is when I don't provide accurate, factual information. Or I fail to show a game in the proper light, right? In other words, not highlighting its features the way I think a quick look should. Because the purpose of the quick look series is to give you, the viewer, potential purchaser of that game, enough information to decide, do you want to dig into it a bit more, purchase it, whatever. And I did not accomplish that with the video yesterday. It was literally my first time playing. With a lot of quick looks, that's the case. But the statement up on it being wave-based was pointed out by a lot of viewers correctly that, look, this isn't a wave-based game. It was based on what I had read about the game. It was pretty obvious while I'm playing that, especially when you look at it after, when you're not caught up in the gameplay, that you realize, yeah, your statements were not accurate, Epix. This is most definitely, especially the campaign, way more FPS-based than wave-based. So that, and the fact that I didn't use the advanced CPU option thinking it was i7 specific. I found out after some more research, no, it runs just fine on the i5. So that's where I came to that decision. I will do a proper version of that either today or tomorrow. So look for that, as well as PlayStation VR, Star Wars quick look. All right. Next up in the preamble, Need for Speed VR, which according to the author, it's launching for Google's Daydream platform via Android. And according to the author, where I was going with that is that it has PS2 era level graphics. Now, for me, for mobility, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Hell, for VR, if a title's immersive, it doesn't need to have all the super eye candy. It's nice, but it doesn't need to have it. The only real issue looking into this game were apparently calibration issues with the Daydream controller. Hopefully those are fixed with driver updates moving forward. And then the last preamble bit, gaming-wise, has to do with a possible PlayStation 4 VR version of Elite Dangerous. This according to Frontier Studios, David Braben, who is head and one of the dynamic duo that created Elite in the first place back in the 80s. Look, consoles are at the point now where, very much like PCs, they can be patched pretty easily. Gone are the days of, not having a lot of system space for updates, and they made damn sure when they released a game, the code was tight because there weren't many updates coming, especially cartridges, right? Different revisions, but those were usually like an annual thing, or every 2 years there might be a different version that fixes bugs. With PlayStation 4, users are pretty used to the update and patch concept now, especially with a lot of games being more mod friendly on the console side of things. So I personally think it's a game that could do very freaking well on the PlayStation side of things. So hopefully we see Elite Dangerous on the PlayStation 4 VR platform. All right, first news story. A new social application called Pluto, which works inside and alongside current games and experiences in virtual reality. A lot of social apps in VR pull you out of what you're in and into, different themed environments or dynamic VR environments. Not so with Pluto. It aims to be kind of low overhead and operate regardless of how demanding the game or experience that you're in is. So what basically happens is, for all the people involved, they simply see the other people's heads and hands, so that's the avatar, the head and hand, on their screen. So if they're playing Space Pirate Trainer, there's the faces and hands floating in the air to chat. So very much like a Steam, or not a Steam chat, but rather Vent, using Vent in a game, talking with your friends while you're playing the game. So that's kind of a neat angle to take. We'll see how successful ultimately they are. And that is Pluto for both Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. Next news piece, AMD with a pretty big update that they're calling the AMD Radeon Crimson Relive patch. And it's basically packed with stuff, including the Oculus newly introduced VR performance enhancement called Asynchronous Space Warp, plus VR-focused rendering features like multi-res and multi-view. And currently, that update is only going to benefit 4XX GPUs. So like the 480, RX 480, for example, not GPUs like my AMD 290 behind me there on the second station. And multi-view is basically AMD's equivalent of Nvidia's SMP, which is simultaneous multi-projection, which enhances efficiency when rendering stereoscopic images. And that's basically almost every HMD uses stereoscopic rendering, so that'll be a nice performance enhancement. And then multi-res is equivalent to Nvidia's multi-res shading, which is also a performance optimization, but this one reduces the detail for the rendered view further towards the edge of a user's field of view. And if that sounds familiar, it should be, because that's basically foveated rendering. And when I looked at Robinson the Journey, that game is an example of using foveated rendering. So very good to see techniques like that being used, because it lowers the cost of entry for VR for PC users. So very cool to see that update from AMD. Next up, some updates on the Microsoft VR HMDs. Now, we knew there would be some updates in December. This is one of those. And this comes from today's Microsoft Windows Hardware Engineering Community event in Shenzhen, China. And basically, they've made it official that Intel HD integrated graphics, so 620 specifically, equivalent and above or greater DX12 API capable GPU will be sufficient to run the Microsoft virtual reality. So the way I kind of think of that, to relay that, is think of a slider bar. The Rift and Vive have a slider bar that brings you to ultra level graphics from, their low is really kind of like a medium. And Microsoft's slider bar is just that much longer, maybe twice as long. The same ultra, very high, high, and medium settings, which would be Rift and Vive's entry level. But then they've got a whole other section of the slider bar bringing you right down to probably experiences in games with not heavy use of polygons, texturing, etc. So that's kind of the way to think of it. Think of it as just a really long slider bar with a very, very low common denominator on one end and the usual ultra on the other. So very cool. More information coming, no doubt, this month on Microsoft VR. Next up, a very good Reddit submission by the author of DayZ and Out of Ammo. He's the creator from RocketWorks, Dean Hall, and he basically took to Reddit to voice his concerns over those of us in the VR community who have been very hard on subsidization and exclusivity. Now, anyone who's watched my beginning videos from months ago, I was a little hard on exclusivity. I didn't like it, but I understood it. I've probably moved even more over to the point where I've not only accepted it, I've recognized it as being pretty much a requirement for a lot of companies. And that's what Dean Hall gets into with his Reddit, just to say, look, our two games, for example, while they sold well, they were so not profitable. And we hear success stories like Raw Data, like The Gallery, that hit the $1 million mark. But notice they didn't talk about profits. Does that mean that $1 million mark meant the game paid for itself, or they just hit $1 million, but really the pays for itself compared to what they put in, was it 2 million, 5? That we don't know. So it's nice for someone like Dean, clearly a developer himself, taking the time to explain to people why. because undoubtedly there's people out there that are way more extreme than maybe even I was in the beginning that are saying, this is BS, all this exclusivity. It's nice to see his take on it. And right now it's that catch-21, that catch-22, famous catch-22, where basically you can't have a lot of extra HMD sales if you don't have the games, but you're not going to have the games if you don't have a lot of HMDs out there to write for. Exclusivity and subsidization, Dean points out, and this is his words, is going to help overcome that until a point where there's critical mass and enough HMDs to support titles without the need for exclusivity subsidization. And he also points out the difficulties of writing. If you're not using something like SteamVR beta, there's challenges to writing for HTC Vive and then also allowing it to work on the Oculus Rift. Now, stuff like Revive and other workarounds show that that's partly true. Yes, while there's probably some complexities involved to make it seamless, that's the only part that I have a little bit of an issue with, thinking that it's as difficult as he makes out. I don't think it has to be, depending on how you approach the project. And of course, that could vary. But I do agree on the exclusivity and subsidization aspects. Now, this next news piece ties directly into that, and it's basically HTC announcing a new subsidiary called Vive Studios to, as they put it, publish deeper, richer, and longer room scale games. Now, this tie is important, and the reason I think it's important is because HTC is once again making it clear that they are in this for the long game, not the short game. They're going to do whatever they can in their power to help VR succeed. Part of that, I think, is what Valve is doing. They're part of the relationship in ensuring that, whatever they create, it's going to work, even if it's not a Vive. And where they're going with this, and specifically HTC's VP of Content, Joel Breton, speaking to Upload VR, and he also happens to be the head of this new operation. He says it's going to be a model that they're going to adopt similar to consoles. I don't want to put any restrictions, he says, on numbers. When it comes to the amounts we're going to offer these studios, it's going to be a flexible model. This is a response to the opportunity we feel currently exists around VR. The VR ecosystem needs support, and we want to come in and throw our muscle around where it can do the most good. So again, putting their money where their mouth is, literally. He goes on to say, we believe content should be open and go wherever consumers want to access it. We don't feel that Oculus needs to lose in order for us to win. So this is now another executive that doesn't necessarily look at them as the competition. Their main focus is VR, survival, thriving, success, period. And maybe behind the scenes they have ulterior motives, but if you take them at that statement, that's a pretty good position, I think, to hold, ultimately to be successful. So good on them for actually throwing the funds around to make this all happen. Next up, also kind of ties into that a bit, SteamVR Beta now renders Oculus touch controllers in VR, on SteamVR Beta titles. So this is what I talked about a week ago when I said, look, even if the game works, you might be a Rift user looking down, and instead of seeing your touch, you see two Vive controllers, which is not going to do much for immersion for you. Nice to see that that's been addressed. A couple of people in the comment section noted it didn't work for them, so it's likely a toggle option. I haven't dug into it that deep. I will. I'll let you guys know. And then the last article has to do with Nvidia, touting that there are 15 million VR Ready PCs sold. This as PlayStation 4 pushes towards 50 million. The reason I think this is an important statement is this doesn't take into account Microsoft's even lower entry point. This is just Nvidia and presumably AMD, their bare minimums and above. So what Nvidia is saying, there are 15 million PCs at that level capable of VR. So there is a lot of market potential for HMD manufacturers to tap into, according to Nvidia. And most people who buy a PC with a gaming style GPU in it, they're doing it for performance reasons, generally because they're going to be doing gaming. A person isn't usually going to get anything other than an Intel GPU if they're not into gaming. If it's simply Microsoft Office they're running, etc., or hell, if it's CAD, yeah, they're going to be using specific Quadro style cards, for example. So I think that is a good indicator, that 15 million, if it's accurate. I haven't seen where the stats are coming from, that there's a lot of potential for VR in the market, still untapped. All right, guys, that is it for the news. So as I said, expect a revised Arizona Sunshine and some PlayStation Star Wars stuff coming out within the next couple of days. I've said that before. It's been hella busy the last 2 weeks. I'm going to keep my word on that into this weekend. As always, guys, cheers, and definitely catch you on the VR flip side.